The council office in St. Ives smelled of wet wool and old paper. Rain pecked at the windows like impatient knuckles, and the radiator ticked with a tired metallic cough that punctuated the silence. Eleanor Ellie Wade stood in front of a laminated map of the Hale estuary, her thrift store coat still damp from the morning downpour. Her fingers raw and red from scrubbing holiday lets in Carbis Bay all morning. The skin around her nails was cracked and whitened from cleaning chemicals, a badge of labor she couldn't hide. Beside her, 10-year-old Maya squeezed a dripping umbrella and tried to quiet the squeak of her trainers on the linoleum. Her school uniform peeked from beneath her raincoat, slightly rumpled from the day. The queue behind them shifted with soft murmurs and the rustle of waterproof jackets. Someone coughed. A phone buzzed unanswered in a pocket. Ellie felt the weight of lots of eyes on her back. Locals who knew her as the cleaning woman from the holiday flats, the single mom who took extra shifts at the pub during tourist season. Across the counter, Giles Harrington, developer, donor, and owner of half the seafront, tilted his chin as if the air were finer closer to the ceiling. His cashmere coat was perfectly dry, his shoes polished to a gleam that reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. He smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive, something that didn't belong in this municipal building with its faded posters about recycling and dog licenses. "So," he said, tapping the map where a sliver of land met the tide, his manicured nail making a sharp click against the plastic, "you've inherited a romantic ruin, a flooded shack, picturesque at low water, useless at high." His voice carried, meant for the audience behind her as much as for Ellie herself. "I do hope you haven't promised your daughter a seaside palace." A few chuckles rose from the queue, the sound brittle as broken seashells. An elderly man near the door shook his head with what might have been pity. The clerk behind the desk smiled tightly, eyes flicking between Harrington and the computer screen as if eager to move on to the next task. Ellie felt heat climb her neck, confusion and shame wrestling inside her chest. The sensation was physical, a tightness that made her shoulders hunch slightly, a warmth that threatened to reach her cheeks. The cabin had belonged to Gran Eunice, a woman who smelled of peat smoke and lavender soap, who had mended nets on that very shore with hands gnarled from salt and work. The papers had arrived last week, deeds brown with age, ribbon frayed, announcing Ellie as sole heir. She had cried over them the way you cry over a song from childhood, without meaning to, the emotion catching her off guard while Maya slept and the television murmured unwatched in the corner. "It belonged to my grandmother," Ellie said, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "She worked the shore there for 50 years. Harrington's expression softened, into something worse than mockery, condescension wrapped in false sympathy. Of course. Heritage, sentiment, all very touching." He leaned forward, his cologne briefly overwhelming the municipal smells. "But you're a practical woman, Ms. Wade, you have responsibilities." His eyes flickered to Maya, who was now tracing the outline of Cornwall on the wall map with her finger, oblivious to the adult currents in the room. The clerk cleared her throat. "The deed is quite clear, Ms. Wade, the property is yours. However, as Mr. Harrington has pointed out, it's in the title zone. There are restrictions on what can be done with it." Harrington flicked a drop of rain from his cuff, the gesture casual but deliberate. "I can take this burden off your hands." "Hesh! Quick! Before the next storm wipes it into the channel." He smiled at Maya as if offering mercy, as if he were doing them a kindness. "Be sensible, love." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Outside, a bus hissed past, sending a wave of dirty water against the curb. The clock on the wall thudded 2 sluggish beats. Ellie swore she could taste salt in the stale air, could hear gulls wheeling beyond the glass. She swallowed, protective anger tightening her grip on Maya's small, cold hand. The word burden hung in the air. That's how he saw it, how he wanted everyone to see it. A burden for poor Ellie Wade, who cleaned other people's holiday homes and raised a child alone. A joke, really. What would she do with a cabin on the estuary? Where would she find the money to fix it? The time to use it? Better to take the cash, be sensible, know her place. Maya looked up at her mother, dark eyes curious. Can we go see it, Mum? The cabin? Today after school? The simple question cut through the tension. A few faces in the queue softened. An older woman with a tartan shopping trolley nodded almost imperceptibly, as if giving permission. No words came to Ellie's lips. Only the kind of silence that makes people shift on their feet and look away, the kind that stores an answer it refuses to spend. She felt something hardening inside her chest. Not just anger, but resolve. Not just pride, but conviction. The deed in her bag seemed to gain weight, pressing against her hip like a reminder. "Take my card," Harrington said, sliding a cream-colored rectangle across the counter. It gleamed under the lights, embossed letters catching the glow. "Call when you've thought it through. But don't wait too long. The tide won't." He nodded to the clerk and strode toward the door, his exit perfectly timed. A man with more important meetings to attend. More significant deals to close. As he passed, Ellie caught a whiff of his cologne again, and beneath it, the faintest trace of smugness. The scent of a man who always got what he wanted, eventually. The door swung shut behind him with a hydraulic sigh, and suddenly the room felt larger. As if it could expand to hold the possibilities of what might come. Next. "Next, please," the clerk called, and Ellie moved aside. The map of the estuary still before her, the sliver of shore that was now hers marked in faded blue. Maya tugged at her hand, ready to leave, but Ellie stood a moment longer, her eyes tracing the contour of land meeting water, seeing not what was there now, but what had been, and perhaps what could be again. Ellie's flat in Trenwith was small enough that the kettle's shrill whistle filled every corner like an insistent visitor. Steam fogged the single pane. Beyond it, the lane shone black and slick in the late afternoon gloom, and neighbors in high-vis jackets hurried past with pasties wrapped in grease-spotted paper. The buildings across the way were washed in the flat, gray light of an autumn day that couldn't decide whether to worsen or improve. Someone's wind chime jangled discordantly 3 doors down. On the counter sat a chipped enamel mug that had once said "Hope" in blue letters. The O and half the P had flaked away years ago, leaving behind what looked almost like H-E, a question without the question mark. She kept it because Gran Eunice had drunk tea from it every dawn before walking to the shore, rain or shine, her Wellingtons leaving damp prints on the kitchen floor that would be dry by the time she returned, smelling of fish and salt. "Homework done?" Ellie asked, pouring hot water over a tea bag, watching the color bloom and spread like a slow bruise. Maya nodded, pushing aside a math worksheet with more correct answers than wrong ones. "Can we still go see the cabin?" Her voice was carefully casual, the way children speak, when they're afraid of disappointment but trying to be brave about it. The rain had eased to a drizzle that beaded on the window like sweat. Ellie glanced at the clock. Nearly 5, the light already fading. She thought of the bus schedule, the walk from the stop, the muddy path along the estuary. She thought of dinner yet to make, a uniform shirt to iron, her own aching feet. "Tomorrow," she promised, setting the mug down carefully. "Saturday. We'll have the whole day then." Maya's face fell for just a second before she recovered, nodding with the resilience that sometimes broke Ellie's heart. Children shouldn't have to be so understanding of adult limitations. "Okay, I'll bring my wellies." Gran had raised Ellie after her father was lost off Gaudrevy in a winter squall. Her mother, brittle with grief, had never returned from Birmingham where she'd gone to clear her head. Ellie learned early to fold into small spaces and make them warm, to stretch a stew, to mend a seam, to laugh at the right time. She had dreamed of training as a nurse, had even begun the courses at the community college. But then Maya arrived, and the man who promised forever left before the cot was built. Ellie's life became a braid of early buses, last-minute favors, and a pocket diary scribbled in pencil. Now, as the evening settled around them, like a familiar blanket, Ellie spooned beans onto toast, cut an apple into careful quarters, and tried to ignore the card without burning a hole in her pocket. Harrington's offer would pay off her credit card debt. It would cover the deposit on a better flat, maybe one with a garden for Maya. It would mean new trainers without having to check the price tag first, a coat that wasn't from the charity shop, perhaps even a weekend away. Sensible, like he said. Tell me about Gran's cabin again, Maya said, pushing a bean around her plate with her fork. The real story, not what that man said. Ellie looked at her daughter. Dark hair in untidy plaits, a smudge of lead on her cheek from where she'd rested her face on her hand while doing homework, eyes serious beyond their years. It's not much to look at, she said honestly, but it was hers. She used to mend nets there, and sometimes she'd let me help, though I wasn't very good at it. She'd brew tea on a little camp stove and tell stories about the old days, about the fish that used to fill the bay, about how your great-granddad would come in with his boat so full they thought it might sink. Were they rich then? Maya asked, the question direct as only children's questions can be. No, Ellie laughed softly. Not with money. But they never went hungry, and they owned their own boat, and people respected them. She paused, the weight of that last word settling between them. That matters, sometimes more than money. That night, while the wind hummed in the gaps around the window, Ellie sat on the floor of their small living room with Gran's brass locket open in her palm. The little glass oval was missing on one side, exposing the faded photograph inside to the damp. It was cracked when I got it, Gran used to say with a shrug. Still keeps a face safe. Ellie turned it toward the lamplight, the metal warm from her skin. The face inside, a young man with Ellie's own eyes, seemed to look past her into memory. Across from her, Maya leaned against a pile of laundered towels that smelled of the launderette's industrial detergent, tracing letters in a workbook, tongue caught in concentration. The television muttered in the background, turned low. Some property show where people with clean hands and hefty budgets transformed ruins into dream homes in the space of an hour. Can we fix the cabin? Maya asked, voice small but clear under the kettle's sigh, as Ellie set it to boil again. The question hung between them, innocent but loaded with all the impossibilities of their life. No time, no money, no skills to rebuild what the sea and neglect had worn away. Ellie looked at the mug, with its broken word, and back at her daughter's earnest face. The workbook where she practiced letters with careful determination. I don't know, she said finally, the honesty a gift she could afford to give. But I think our life can change. Sometimes it does. She said it softly, like setting a lantern out on a dark step, a light, to find your way home by. The next morning dawned surprisingly clear. The sky swept clean by a night wind that had rattled the windows and sent the neighborhood cats searching for shelter. Ellie woke before the alarm, the unfamiliar brightness pulling her from dreams. She made tea in the chipped mug and stood by the window, watching the town come to life below. The baker's van making deliveries, a solitary jogger splashing through puddles, gulls wheeling above the slate rooftops. Is today cabin day? Maya asked, appearing in the doorway in mismatched pajamas, hair a riot of sleep tangles. Cabin day, Ellie confirmed, and the smile that broke across Maya's face was worth every doubt, every worry about what they'd find there, every fear of disappointment. They caught the bus just as it pulled up to the stop, the driver nodding in recognition. Ellie had cleaned his holiday rental last summer, remembered his preference for the sheets folded in thirds rather than halves. They sat near the back, Maya's face pressed to the window as St. Ives slipped behind them, and the landscape opened into the greens and blues of the estuary. The tide was out when they arrived, revealing a shoreline of dark mud and glittering pools. The path was slippery with seaweed, and their wellies made sucking sounds as they picked their way toward the cabin that crouched on its stilts at the edge of the channel. Gray boards, a roof patched with tar paper, the door swollen from storms. It looked even smaller than Ellie remembered, more fragile against the vast sky. It's like a pirate hideout, Maya whispered, the words fogging in the cold air. Her eyes were wide with a wonder that Ellie hadn't expected, a delight that transformed the shabby shack into something magical. The key was stiff in the lock, reluctant after years of disuse. Ellie had to lean her weight against the door, feeling the wood give with a groan of protest. Inside, the floor was damp and gritty underfoot. A kettle lay rusting on a crooked shelf. Nets hung like faded ghosts from hooks on the wall. When Ellie pressed her cheek to the wood, it was clammy as a held breath, smelling of salt and forgotten summers. Gran used to sit here, she said, indicating a three-legged stool propped against the wall, and sort through her catch or mend her nets. Sometimes other fishermen would stop by, and they'd share flasks of tea or something stronger and talk about the weather, the tides, who'd caught what and where. Maya ran her fingers along the shelf, leaving trails in the dust. It's ours now? Really ours? Ellie nodded, watching her daughter explore the small space with careful curiosity. Really ours. Outside, the tide was turning, the first fingers of water creeping back into the channel. A gull landed on the roof, its cry harsh against the quiet. Ellie thought of Harrington's card in her pocket, of all the sensible reasons to take his offer. But as she watched Maya peer out the salt-crusted window, at the changing tide, something shifted inside her, a resolve as steady as the rhythm of the sea itself. The next tide felt personal, as if the water were rising specifically to challenge Ellie's resolve. She and Maya picked their way over bladder-wrack and slippery stones toward the shack, the afternoon light catching on broken shells and glass polished smooth by the sea. The air tasted of salt and diesel, the distant purr of boat engines mixing with the cry of gulls overhead. Maya's wellies left perfect imprints in the wet sand, small testimonies that disappeared as the water inched higher. Look, Maya said, pointing to a crab scuttling sideways into a pool. He lives here too. Ellie smiled, her chest tight with a feeling she couldn't name. Pride, perhaps, or a sense of connection to this slice of shore that now belonged to them on paper. Or maybe it was simply that Maya saw wonder where Harrington had seen only a burden. Inside the cabin, the floor was even damper than before, the rising tide sending water through the gaps in the boards. It pooled in the low spots, reflecting the gray light from the single window. Ellie tested each plank with her foot, noting which ones gave slightly, which ones held firm. The walls creaked with the weight of memory and neglect. We'd need new boards, she murmured, more to herself than to Maya, and proper ceiling. Silicone or tar for the gaps? The mental list grew, each item attached to a price she couldn't afford, hours she didn't have. A proper fix would mean hiring someone, and if she had that kind of money, they wouldn't be living in the flat with its temperamental heating and shared laundry facilities. Maya had discovered a shelf with old jars, cloudy glass filled with rusty nails, fishing hooks, twine brittle with age. What are these for? She asked, carefully setting one down, dust clinging to her fingertips. Mending, Ellie said, crossing to stand beside her daughter. When nets tear, you need to join the broken parts. It's delicate work. Gran's hands were so nimble, even when her joints got bad. She demonstrated with an invisible needle, the motion coming back to her from childhood. In, under, over, through. Again and again until the hole disappears. Maya mimicked the motion, her small hands serious in the task. Could we mend this place? Make it whole again? The innocent question landed hard in Ellie's chest. She wanted to say yes, to promise that they could restore this piece of their heritage. But promises required resources, time, money, knowledge she didn't possess. She opened her mouth to give a gentle no, to prepare Maya for the likelihood that Harrington's offer was the sensible choice, when her phone chimed. It was a text from her supervisor at the cleaning service. Schedule changes. See you Monday for updated hours. Not your hours, but updated hours, the careful language of reduction. Mum? Maya was looking at her, concern shadowing her young face. Just work, Ellie said, sliding the phone back into her pocket. Nothing important. They continued exploring, Ellie's thoughts now divided between the cabin's needs and the likely cut in her income. The walls were surprisingly sound despite the years of neglect. The roof mostly intact except for one corner where the tar paper had peeled away. The door would need replacing, the stilts reinforcing. All fixable things in theory, with enough resources. Let's check the other side, she suggested, moving toward the wall where nets hung, like the ghosts of better days. She ran her fingers along a beam and felt a nick, a tiny notch pattern she remembered. A compass rose Gran had carved again and again into picnic tables and walking sticks. A personal mark in a world that often overlooked her. She pressed harder, feeling the wood give a little under her fingertip. The beam wasn't as solid as it looked. Maya, quick-eyed, crouched beside her. "Mom, look! A floorboard's loose!" Her fingertips were black with salt and old tar as she pointed to where the plank met the wall. Ellie knelt, ignoring the damp that immediately soaked through her jeans. The board did seem different from the others, less firmly attached. She pressed on one end, and the opposite side lifted slightly, revealing a shadow beneath. "Hand me that," she said, pointing to a piece of driftwood Maya had been using as a pretend sword. With the driftwood as a lever, she pried the board up further, sending a shower of dust and splinters into the air. Maya sneezed, and the sound echoed in the small space. And there, under the lifted plank, was the corner of a tin, the kind sailors used to keep biscuits safe from the damp. "What is it?" Maya whispered, as if the discovery required hushed voices. "I don't know," Ellie admitted, working her fingers into the gap. The tin was wedged tight, as if it had been hidden in haste or the wood had swollen around it over time. With a grunt of effort, she pulled, and the metal came free with a protesting scrape. It was an old tobacco tin, the kind Gran had kept buttons in at home. The lid was sealed with what looked like candle wax around the edges, preserving whatever was inside from the ever-present moisture. Maya's little palm smelled of iron and sea as she worked the tin free completely, cradling it like treasure. The lid clung like a secret. Ellie eased it open with the flat of a rusty nail she found on the shelf, and the metal gave with a soft sigh. Inside lay oilskin tied with twine, a parcel dry as if time had been asked to wait. Ellie's fingers trembled as she unwound it. She half expected nothing. Old nails, a broken pipe stem, some keepsake of her grandfather's that meant nothing to anyone but Gran. Instead, there were papers. Cream-gone ivory, edges scalloped from age. A black and white photograph of fishermen outside a shed, and a brass token stamped with a pilchard and the words STIVESINSHORECOOPERATIVE, 1948. "What does it say?" Maya asked, leaning close, her breath warm on Ellie's cold hands. Ellie carefully unfolded the first document, a deed thick with seals, Gran Eunice's lean signature branching like seaweed across the bottom. The second was a charter for the cooperative, a promise that the tidal path and the sheds along it, including the cabin known as Yoon's hut, would remain for the shared benefit of working families who fished and mended there. Her heart began to beat faster as her eyes caught on a clause that sparked on the page like sun on water. No private development shall enclose or extinguish the right-of-way without the unanimous consent of the cooperative's members or their heirs. Under it lay a letter on onion skin dated 1952 from a solicitor with a Penzance address, acknowledging shares granted to Eunice Wade and naming future beneficiary rights. There were notes, too, in Gran's hand. Names of men and women long gone, the price of rope in austere years, and a line that made Ellie's throat tighten. "Keep the path open. The sea belongs to those who respect it." "Is it treasure?" Maya asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Like in Pirates?" "Maybe a different kind," Ellie said, her mind racing. These weren't just old papers, they were proof. Evidence that the cabin wasn't just a worthless shack, as Harrington had suggested, but part of a cooperative with legal rights. That the path itself was protected. That development couldn't swallow this small piece of working heritage without consent. Maya held the brass token up to the light by, turning it this way and that to watch the tarnished metal catch the glow. "Is it worth anything?" Ellie pressed the letter to her heart for a moment, breathing in the dry, peppery smell of old ink. "Maybe," she said, thinking less of money than of leverage, of dignity. The cabin was no joke. It was a keystone, a thread the whole net hung from. Outside, the tide had risen enough to lap at the stilts beneath the cabin. The wind had picked up, carrying the sound of a radio from somewhere down the shore, a song Ellie half recognized, something her father used to whistle. She gathered the papers carefully, wrapping them back in the oilskin before slipping them into her coat pocket. "We should go," she said, helping Maya replace the floorboard. "The path will be underwater soon." They walked out into the wind, papers wrapped in Ellie's scarf for extra protection. The gulls had settled on the sand like folded handkerchiefs, patient in the face of the changing tide. For the first time in days, Ellie felt taller. Not rich, but rooted. She could hear Gran in the rasp of the reeds. "Stand up straight, girl. The tide can be rough, but it keeps its word. It always comes back, and it always goes out again. You just need to know when to hold your ground." On the way back to the bus stop, Maya's hand warm in hers, Ellie's phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from her landlord. "Reminder, rent increases next quarter as per. Notice?" The familiar anxiety rose, calculations of hours needed, bills to juggle, where to cut back further. But it felt different now. Less like drowning, more like wading through difficult water toward solid ground. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Maya asked as they waited for the bus, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. Ellie looked down at her daughter, then out toward the estuary where the cabin stood against the darkening sky. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like a promise she could keep. "Tomorrow we'll bring tools. And maybe some paint." As they climbed onto the bus, the driver nodding to them in recognition, Ellie felt the weight of the papers against her heart. She wasn't just a cleaner with a child and too many bills. She was the heir to something that mattered, something worth fighting for. And fight she would, starting with a visit to the local library to research exactly what these documents meant, and then to the town hall, where Harrington and his plans would be waiting. On the way back, a letter waited under the flat's door, official blue ink on white paper that seemed to glow in the dim hallway light. Ellie picked it up with damp fingers, Maya already racing ahead to turn on the heating. The envelope felt heavy with bad news. She was right, her cleaning hours had been cut. "Seasonal adjustments," the manager wrote in tiny perfumed loops that belied the cold calculation behind them. Under it, another envelope, the landlord's formal notice of the rent increase next quarter, the numbers precise as pins. Ellie read both on the stairs with the noise of a television bleeding through plaster from Mrs. Kernow's flat. A game show where people screamed with delight over washing machines and holidays in Spain. Her throat worked once, swallowing down the rising panic. The numbers braided into a rope that pulled tight around her future. "Is that from the treasure man?" Maya called from inside, her voice bright with the innocence Ellie worked so hard to preserve. "No, love. Just work stuff." Ellie folded the letters carefully, tucking them into her pocket where they sat like stones against the cooperative documents. The contrast wasn't lost on her, one set of papers threatening to sink her, another offering a lifeline she wasn't yet sure how to grasp. The next morning, while Maya was at school, Ellie took the documents to the library in Penzance. The building smelled of dust and furniture polish, warm radiators making the air thick and drowsy. At a back table beside a window streaked with rain, she spread the papers carefully. The charter's text was faded but legible, the legal language dense as nets. "Need any help?" The librarian appeared silently beside her, a woman about Gran's age with glasses on a chain and hands mottled with age spots. "I'm trying to understand what these mean," Ellie admitted, indicating the papers. "They're from my grandmother, about a fishing cooperative in St. Ives." The woman peered through her glasses. "The inshore co-op?" "Lord, I haven't heard about that in years." Her finger traced the top line of the charter. "My father was a member. Had a shed down by the channel." Ellie's heart skipped. "Do you know if it's still legally valid?" "The co-op?" "Let's find out." The librarian's smile creased her face like well-loved fabric. "The local history section might help, and I know a few people we could call." By the time Ellie needed to leave for school pickup, she had a notebook filled with names, dates, and legal terms underlined twice. The charter, it seemed, had never been dissolved. The rights it established still existed, dormant perhaps, but alive as seeds in winter soil. Most importantly, several of the original families still had members in St. Ives, including the Trevelyan's, the Penhaligans, and the Trureaus. "This could matter," the librarian had said, her eyes bright with interest. "With development eating up the coast, these old rights of way are gold dust." Ellie caught the bus back to St. Ives, the cooperative papers now in a folder the librarian had given her, protected from the persistent drizzle. She sat with her forehead against the cool glass, watching the landscape slide past. Granite and gorse, the sea a flat gray line in the distance. Her phone buzzed. A text from the pub where she picked up evening shifts when she could find someone to watch Maya. No shifts this week, sorry, quiet season. By Friday, a photo of the shack had made the local Facebook page with a caption, Inheritance of the Century. Who got the palace? She scrolled through comments that smelled bad, somehow of beer breath and small-town resentment, people she'd gone to school with making jokes at her expense. Harrington's assistant called with a final, generous offer, the amount enough to clear her debts but not enough to change her life. Her planner filled with question marks where her income should be. The shock of it all left her hands clumsy. A mug slipped and shattered on the kitchen floor, tea climbing her shins like a tide. She sat on the tiles, feeling foolish for crying over heat and sugar, over broken ceramic. Maya found her there, returned from a friend's house with rain-damp hair and concerned eyes too old for her face. "It's okay, Mum," she said, fetching the dustpan without being asked. "We can use Gran's mug instead." That evening, they went to the shack again, not out of sense but stubbornness, taking the last bus and walking the darkening path with a torch Maya had received for Christmas. The wind had sand in it, and someone's radio carried from a boatyard. Thin, cheerful music that seemed to mock their purpose. Inside, the cabin felt different now that they knew its secret. Not just a ruin, but a possibility. Not just Gran's past, but their future. Ellie set a camping lantern on the shelf, its glow warming the damp wood to honey. Maya had brought a notebook and was listing all the things they'd need to make it. Proper. Her childish handwriting serious with intent. The tide whispered below them, rising to reclaim its territory. "If we fix it," Maya said, looking up from her list, "could we live here?" Ellie shook her head, settling beside her daughter on the dusty floor. "No, love. It's too small and the tide comes in twice a day. But we could use it, like Gran did. A place to work, to meet people, to watch the birds." She paused, a new thought forming. Or maybe others could use it too. People who need it. Maya nodded, satisfied with the answer. Like a clubhouse. Like a cooperative, Ellie corrected gently, where people share. They worked by lantern light, Maya sweeping while Ellie examined the walls more carefully, testing boards, making notes, building a mental map of what might be possible. The cooperative papers sat on the shelf in their folder, a physical reminder of their purpose. "We should bring tools next time," Maya said, her voice echoing slightly in the small space. "Dad left that toolkit under the sink. I could bring my hammer." "Dad." The word still snagged like a fishing hook in Ellie's heart. 4 years gone, not a word since. But he had left things. The toolkit, Maya's dark eyes, a wariness in Ellie that made her hesitate to hope. "Good idea," she said, forcing a smile. "The proper tools for the proper job, like Gran always said." Outside, the night had deepened to velvet, stars pricking through gaps in the cloud cover. The path back would be tricky in the dark, but they'd brought the torch. As they prepared to leave, Maya ran her fingers along the compass rose carved into the beam, tracing its points with reverence. "Mum, look, there's another one here." Her fingertips had found a second carving, smaller and newer looking. Not a compass rose, but an E with a W nestled inside it. Eunice Wade, her mark made permanent in the grain. Ellie stared at it while the shack creaked, the tide turning. Something uncurled, thin as smoke inside her chest. Not just determination now, but certainty. This place was theirs in more than paper. It was etched into their history, into the wood itself. "Let's go home," she said, gathering their things. "We've got work to do tomorrow." The path back was slick with seaweed and shadows, but Maya's torch carved a tunnel of light ahead of them. From the shore came the gentle percussion of waves on stone, nature's patient rhythm. Ellie felt the beat of it in her blood, keeping time with her new resolve. She would not sell, she would not retreat. She would find a way to honor what Grant had left them. Not just a shack, but a standing place. Not just a deed, but a right to belong. The town hall buzzed like a hive, wet coats steaming gently in the heated air. The tang of coffee from a machine in the corner. The wooden floor humming under boots. Rain drummed against the high windows, turning the view of St. Ives Harbor into an impressionist painting. Boats bobbing as blurry smudges of color. People filled the folding chair, more standing along the walls. Fishermen with weathered hands, shopkeepers in sensible jumpers, young couples whose conversations stopped whenever the door opened. Harrington stood by a roll-up banner with his company's logo, a stylized wave in corporate blue, smiling for a photographer from the local paper, voice smooth as cream as he gestured toward glossy display boards. Plans for a riverside complex glowed on easels. Glass balconies, yacht slips, a restaurant with panoramic views, words like revitalization and heritage nods stacked in polite fonts. Behind him, the rain stitched bright lines down the windows. "It's about bringing St. Ives into the 21st century," he was saying to a cluster of council members, his cashmere scarf looped precisely at his throat. "Celebrating what makes Cornwall special while creating sustainable luxury tourism. Jobs, revenue, prestige." Ellie sat in the back row with Maya beside her, the cooperative documents in a folder on her lap. Her hands felt cold despite the overheated room. Mrs. Trevelyan sat on her other side, her arthritis-twisted fingers gripping a walking stick inlaid with mother-of-pearl. They'd met yesterday, over tea served in mismatched cups in a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and cat. Mrs. Trevelyan had recognized the token immediately. Her husband had had one identical. "I've called everyone I could find," the older woman whispered, her breath smelling of peppermints. "Truro's grandson is here, and Penhaligon's girl. Some of the others are gone or moved away, but we've got enough." Ellie nodded, scanning the room. She recognized a few faces she'd searched out over the past 2 days. A harbor master nearing retirement, a woman who ran the fish stall on the wharf, a man whose father had sailed with her grandfather. They'd listened to her with varying degrees of interest and skepticism, but they'd come. That was something. Maya fidgeted beside her, the brass token hanging around her neck on a new string. She'd polished it last night until the pilchard gleamed, proud to be its keeper. "Are you going to speak, Mom?" "When it's time," Ellie said, her throat dry. Public speaking had never been her strength. At school, she'd chosen detention over oral presentations. But now the words she needed to say felt lodged behind her breastbone, painful and necessary as a splinter working its way out. The council chairman called the meeting to order, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. First the minutes, then updates on road repairs, a brief discussion of holiday parking permits. Ellie half listened, watching Harrington check his expensive watch, his expression one of polite patience. He knew the real business would come last. His business, the reason most people had braved the weather to be here. "Next item," the chairman said finally, shuffling his papers. "Proposed development at Hale Estuary, Trevelyan Point." He nodded toward Harrington. "Harrington, would you like to present your plans?" Harrington stepped forward, his smile practiced and warm. "Thank you, Chairman." "Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm proposing is a thoughtful, environmentally conscious development that honors St. Ives' maritime heritage while creating significant economic opportunities." His voice washed over the room, smooth as the tide coming in. He spoke of jobs, construction first, then hospitality, of increased property values, of putting St. Ives on the map for a certain class of visitor, of sustainability and conservation zones and traditional materials. Behind him, an assistant clicked through digital renderings on a large screen. Sunsets, happy families, yachts gleaming in a harbor that never showed mud or seaweed. Ellie watched the faces around her. Some nodded, clearly seeing the potential benefits. Others remained impassive, Cornwall's natural suspicion of outsiders showing in the set of their jaws. A few looked troubled, especially the older residents who had seen promises come and go with each new wave of development. "As part of our commitment to the community," Harrington continued, indicating a specific display board, We'll be creating a heritage walkway with informational plaques about the area's fishing history. The existing structures, mostly derelict, will be replaced with historically inspired viewing platforms. Maya's hand tightened on Ellie's arm. "That's our cabin," she whispered, pointing to a corner of the rendering where their shack was visible as a gray smudge, already half erased. Harrington smoothly addressed potential concerns. Environmental impact, minimal. Traffic, a new road planned. Affordability, a few units reserved for local rates. His presentation was polished, confident, the result of having done this many times before in many coastal towns. When he finished, the applause was scattered but respectful. The chairman thanked him and opened the floor for questions. Several hands went up. Harrington fielded inquiries about construction timelines, noise levels, local hiring practices. His answers were prepared, reasonable, hard to argue with. The mood in the room shifted subtly toward acceptance, the path of least resistance. Ellie waited until the counselor invited public comment. Her heart beat against the documents in her folder, each thud a knock on a locked door. Maya stood on a chair beside her, fingers twisting the brass token on its string. Mrs. Trevelyan nodded encouragement, her eyes bright with a fighter's gleam despite her fragile appearance. When Ellie stepped forward, people shifted, and the room's sound narrowed to her own breathing and the distant cough of an engine from the quay. Her sensible shoes squeaked slightly on the polished floor. She felt tall and small at once, visible and invisible. "My name is Eleanor Wade," she began, voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach, accented by the plain cadence of local streets. "My grandmother was Eunice Wade." A few of the older residents straightened at the name, recognition in their eyes. "She mended nets in those sheds you're planning to replace." She was part of something called the St. Ives Inshore Cooperative. Harrington's expression remained pleasant, though his eyes narrowed slightly. He clearly hadn't expected opposition beyond the usual environmental concerns that he knew how to manage. "My grandmother, and others like her, formed this cooperative after the war. They put in writing that the tidal path and working huts are for families like ours, and that no one can build over them without the heirs' consent." She laid the deed and charter on the table at the front, the seals bright as berries against the age-yellowed paper. "I am an heir. So are the children and grandchildren of those men in this photograph." She held up the black and white photo from the tin. Faces looked out, serious in their work clothes, the estuary visible behind them, much as it was now, unchanged by time if not by tide. A murmur rose, not laughter, but recognition. Some people leaned forward to see better. The counselor came closer, spectacles low on his nose as he examined the documents. The town solicitor frowned, tracing the clause about unanimous consent with a fingertip. "That's my father," someone called from the back, pointing to the photograph. "Third from the left." The voice was wet with memory, thick with emotion. A woman near the window nodded, adding, "And my uncle beside him." Cameras clicked, no longer for Harrington's banner, but for this unexpected turn, this glimpse of history made present. The council secretary was taking rapid notes. Harrington cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Old documents can be interesting historical artifacts, but the planning process has already established that this area is available for development. Sentiment doesn't, law does," Ellie said, not unkindly. She held up the letter from the Penzance solicitor. This cooperative was properly registered. Its terms are binding on all future owners of the properties it covers. The rights of way it establishes can't be extinguished without agreement from all heirs. She turned the token between her fingers, the pilchard catching the light. This isn't about stopping change or progress. It's about who gets to stay and who decides what happens. It's about honoring a promise that kept food on our tables when times were hard. Harrington flushed, the precise red of an English apple. His assistant leaned in, whispering something in his ear. His jaw tightened, the muscles working visibly. "Perhaps," the council chairman interjected, looking between Harrington and Ellie, "we should adjourn to review these documents properly. If there are legal questions about ownership and rights, I'm not claiming I own the entire estuary, Ellie said, her voice finding strength. Just that my grandmother and these others established certain rights that still exist. Rights that Mr. Harrington's project would eliminate. The room expanded, fishermen in thick sweaters nodding in approval, teachers in sensible shoes exchanging glances, teenagers smelling of rain and crisps, all witnessing this moment when the expected flow of things, money to power, power to change, hit an unexpected current. Ellie didn't gloat. She kept her face composed, her voice level. She looked at Maya, who looked back like a small lighthouse, proud and fierce. Then at Mrs. Trevelyan, whose gnarled hand raised in silent support. Then at the others she'd gathered, the heirs to a promise made generations ago and kept in a rusty tin beneath weathered boards. We'll restore the cabin, Ellie said, voice firm, gaze moving from the council to Harrington and back. We'll keep the path open, as the charter requires. And if there's profit to be made from this shore, the families who built this place, who worked and bled and froze on those tides, will have a voice in how it happens and a share in what comes after. Applause rose rough and bright, like wind filling sails. Not from everyone. Some faces remained concerned or confused, but enough. Enough to matter, enough to change the tide. By summer, the cabin stood straight on new stilts, its boards planed and oiled to a honey glow. The compass rose carved into the lintel above the door. The June sun warmed the wood to release a scent like warm bread. Wildflowers grew where Ellie and Maya had scattered seeds in spring, sea pinks and yellow horn poppies nodding in the constant breeze off the water. Someone, Mrs. Trevelyan thought it might have been old Percy from the boatyard, had anonymously left a handcrafted weather vane shaped like a pilchard that now turned with each change of wind. The path was busy again with the old rhythms, boots scuffing, ropes rasping, laughter carried thin on the breeze. Children chased each other around coiled nets while their parents and grandparents sat on benches built from reclaimed timber, drinking tea and sharing news. Tourists paused to read the small exhibition Maya had helped create. Photographs and stories of the cooperative members. A timeline of the estuary's working history. Quotes from oral histories Ellie had recorded over winter evenings. "Another pot?" Mrs. Trevelyan asked, holding up the teapot that never seemed to empty. She and Ellie shared a table outside the cabin on Saturdays, selling tea and homemade lemonade, pasties from the bakery up the hill, and postcards featuring Maya's surprisingly good drawings of local birds. The money went into a tin labeled Cooperative Fund, used for maintaining the path and supporting community events. "Please," Ellie said, holding out her cup. Gran's mug, actually, the hope now complete with a careful stroke of blue paint that Maya had applied one rainy afternoon. The German couple might come back. They were asking about the history of pilchard fishing. It had been a hard-fought victory. After the town hall meeting, there had been weeks of legal consultations, meetings with planning officers, negotiations with Harrington's company. The cooperative charter was verified, its provisions still binding. The council signed an agreement that recognized the heirs' rights while allowing for some development, tasteful, scaled back, and respectful of the working nature of the shore. Ellie's flat felt bigger now, though its walls hadn't moved. Perhaps it was that she spent more time at the cabin, or that the community that had gathered around the restoration project had become an extended family of sorts. Or maybe it was simply that the weight of constant worry had lifted, making more space for joy, for possibility, for breathing. She had kept her cleaning jobs, but added new work, managing the cooperative's small affairs, leading heritage walks along the shore, even writing articles for a local magazine about traditional crafts and coastal life. The pay wasn't much, but it filled the gaps, and there was dignity in it that no amount of scrubbing holiday lets could provide. Harrington, tight-lipped but not cruel, had pivoted his project upriver, adding apprenticeships for local teens and a genuine working space for fishermen as part of his amended plans. There were apologies without dramatics, a nod across the market when they occasionally crossed paths, a letter to the paper that said simply, "We got ahead of ourselves." Respect, like rain after drought, soaked slowly and everywhere. "Mom!" Mrs. T! Maya called, running up the path with something clutched in her hands. Her school was out for summer, and she spent her days between the Sahn and the beach and the library, where the kindly librarian had taken her under her wing. Look what I found. She held out a piece of sea glass, its edges worn smooth by tide and time, the color a rare deep blue that caught the sunlight. It's the exact color of our mug, she said, breathless with the discovery. Can we keep it in the cabin? For good luck? Perfect spot for it, Mrs. Trevelyan said, indicating a small shelf inside the door where they kept found treasures. Interesting shells, a piece of driftwood shaped like a dolphin, a coin dated 1922 that someone had discovered under the floorboards during the restoration. Maya carefully placed the sea glass among the collection, then stepped back to admire the effect. At 10, nearly 11, as she frequently reminded everyone, she had grown an inch since winter, her face losing some of its childish roundness. She wore the brass token every day, polishing it weekly with a soft cloth, proud to explain its significance to anyone who asked. Not class in 10 minutes, she said, glancing at the clock they'd hung beside the cooperative charter, now framed and protected from the salt air. Twice a week, she taught younger children how to tie fishing knots, skills Gran Eunice had passed to Ellie, who had then taught Maya, the circle continuing, unbroken as the tides. Don't forget to thank Mr. Penhaligon for the new rope, Ellie reminded her. The old fisherman had donated coils of practice line, pleased to see traditional skills being passed on. The afternoon unfolded in golden increments, visitors coming and going, the tide retreating to reveal glittering mudflats where wading birds hunted, Maya's voice carrying clear instructions to her small students. Ellie moved between tasks, pouring tea, answering questions, adjusting the small exhibition, sweeping sand from the cabin's threshold. Simple work, honest work. A shadow fell across the table. Ellie looked up to find Harrington standing there, his usual tailored clothes replaced by chinos and a cotton shirt with rolled sleeves. He looked older in the unforgiving sunlight, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered. Mrs. Wade, he said, his voice less smooth than it had been in the town hall. I was just walking the site upriver. Thought I'd see what you've done here. Ellie rose, surprised but composed. Mr. Harrington? Would you like some tea? He hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. That would be pleasant. Mrs. Trevelyan excused herself with remarkable timing, leaving them alone at the small table. Harrington looked around, taking in the restored cabin, the busy path, the children learning knots under Maya's serious instruction. You've accomplished a great deal, he said finally, accepting the steaming cup. It's not what I would have built, but it has... He paused, searching for the word. Integrity. Thank you, Ellie said, sensing the effort this visit cost him. Your new plans look good too. The working spaces for local boats especially. He nodded, sipping the tea. Turns out there was room for both our visions, with some adjustment. His gaze moved to the framed charter visible through the cabin door. I still think my solicitors could have found a way around that document, but perhaps it's better this way. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence, watching a sailboat tack across the bay, its white sail bright against the blue water. Progress and tradition, existing side by side as they always had in places resilient enough to accommodate both. Well, he said, rising after finishing his tea. Good day, Mrs. Wade? He hesitated, then added, if you ever want to discuss the possibility of expanding this, making it a more formal heritage center, perhaps, my office would be interested in talking. Ellie smiled, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. I'll bring it up at the next cooperative meeting. After he left, Maya bounded over, her lesson finished for the day. Was that the rich man? The one who wanted to knock down our cabin? Mr. Harrington, yes, Ellie said, gathering the empty cups. He came to see what we've done with the place. Maya frowned, protective instincts flaring. Did he say sorry? In his way, Ellie said, ruffling her daughter's hair. People usually do. Eventually, if you give them the chance. One evening, as dusk pooled purple over the estuary and the smell of fried fish drifted from Porthminster, Ellie and Maya sat on the cabin steps with two steaming mugs. The day's visitors had gone, leaving behind only footprints that the rising tide would soon erase. A fox trotted along the water's edge, elegant and wild, its coat catching the last light. Maya leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, the token cool against her collarbone. "Did we win?" she asked, voice low under the soft shur of the tide. "When we found the papers and stopped Mr. Harrington." Ellie thought of Grand's locket with its missing glass, now repaired by a jeweler in Penzance who had refused payment when he heard the story. She thought of the photo restored and copied for all the cooperative families, of the hands that had lifted and bolted and sanded pieces of a life back together. She thought of the first time she had stood in the council office, small and ashamed, and how differently she walked through town now, not wealthy, not powerful, but belonging in a way that couldn't be bought or sold. She kissed Maya's hair, salt cool and sweet with shampoo. "We kept a promise," she said. "We found our place and made room for others. That matters more than any headline or any amount of money." Maya smiled into the steam rising from her mug. "Then we're rich, aren't we?" Ellie laughed, the sound easy as a gull's arc against the darkening sky. "We are," she said, squeezing Maya's fingers. "Love and dignity and a place to stand. Those are treasures no one can steal." The tide turned, water flowing back into channels cut by centuries of the same patient motion. Inside the cabin, the sea glass caught the last of the day's light, glowing blue as memory, as hope. The compass rose above the door, pointed in all directions at once, to the past with its hard lessons, to the future with its uncertain promises, and to this moment, perfect in its simplicity, rich beyond measure.